Ian, can we start this part of the news panel with Rishi Sunak's visit to Scotland? He sat down. By all intents and purposes, what we hear has some very cordial conversations with Nicola Sturgeon, which seems like a sort of an important step forward for the two sort of heads of England and Scotland, or Great Britain and Scotland, as it were. And it felt like that was a sort of a much more generous response from Nicola Sturgeon for the more recent Prime Ministers.
I think this is a complete reset of relations between Downing Street and Holyrood. And just from a personality base, you can see how Rishi Sunak and Nicola Sturgeon would hit it off in a way that Liz Truss and Nicola Sturgeon never would. A lot of politics is based on interpersonal relationships. If you don't get on with somebody, you're unlikely to have a constructive relationship. So I think Rishi Sunak will have been very keen to sort of suss Nicola Sturgeon out. Obviously, she wants to have a second referendum. He doesn't want to allow one. So there will have been some difficult discussions, but you can just imagine them sitting down to dinner and actually having a very cordial discussion in a way that you can't imagine her doing that with Truss or Boris.
And it feels like, Jackie, the fact that they were talking about all sorts of things, but not least two potential free ports in Scotland as well, which feels like a very positive economic position to be announcing to Scottish people with regard to the Prime Minister stood alongside Nicola Sturgeon. Feels like a good sort of bit of PR for the Union.
New government funding as well. That's never a bad thing.
No, I mean, that's presumably why he was up there in the first place.
Yeah.
Although I think Ian's right, that he's trying to rebuild bridges from, of course, Liz Truss, who famously said she was going to ignore her, and Boris Johnson, who Nicola Sturgeon thought was, you know, a sort of disgrace. But it's the right thing to do for the Prime Minister to be meeting with the elected First Minister of Scotland, to be discussing the free ports. I think they discussed the state of the NHS. They were talking about, you know, other important areas for the people that they represent. So it's serious grown-up politics. It's the right thing to do. You know, I don't share... I wouldn't have elected either of them. But given that they're in their jobs, I want them to be talking sensibly for the benefit... Well, I would hope for the benefit of the Union, but certainly for the benefit of things like the NHS and public spending across Scotland and the rest of the UK.
A win from Rishi Sunak you could see there, but you mentioned Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon's discussed. It looks like he could still be a thorn in the side. It seems like he's arranging to have this meeting with Zelensky, which immediately people are saying that undermines Rishi Sunak's position as the Premier.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Ian will have something to say about the creditable role that Boris Johnson had in supporting Ukraine. I think he did the right thing. I think he led the country in the right way in doing that. And you can understand why he therefore wants to maintain that relationship and to continue reminding people about it and showing his support for Ukraine. I don't particularly mind that. Of course, we hear this morning that he's also received £1 million donation to his office.
Why would he need £1 million? I mean, I find that...
Quite. He claims it's about his role as a former Prime Minister, but it will, of course, prompt further rumours around the idea that he thinks somehow or another he's got a route back into Downing Street, which I'm not, you know, I really aren't. First of all, I think it would be a disaster for the country. I'm not even sure politically whether or not he has. I mean, let's not forget he's got a parliamentary seat, which if polls continue to be as they are at the moment, he risks losing.
His majority is very slim, isn't it?
So he should probably be spending a bit more time in Ruislip.
Aren't we led to believe he's
quiet money, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. We led to believe he's sort of negotiating for a safer seat as well, to sort of get out of the way and not get into...
Well, he's said that he will stand in Uxbridge. I mean, it's possible he could go elsewhere. That it has been done before. It depends whether he sees parliamentary politics as his future. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be Prime Minister.
Well, if someone's going to donate him £1 million, you feel like he's still got enough influence that people are willing to support him.
Well, all ex-Prime Ministers set up offices. Tony Blair did, Gordon Brown has, Margaret Thatcher did. And, I mean, £1 million sounds a hell of a lot of money. But if you think, even if you're going to have just a sort of 3-room office, if you have it in central London, that's going to cost you probably upwards of £200,000 in rent a year. You've then got your staff, all the equipment. So it doesn't surprise me that he would need that kind of money. Okay. And there's nothing... I mean, what do we want to do? Have it done by the taxpayer? I don't think so. Well, if it's not done by the taxpayer, it has to be raised privately. So, again, I've no issue with that. Should he come back as Prime Minister? I would say no, but there's nothing wrong with having an aspiration to come back. Many Prime Ministers in the past, I've written a book about this, many of them have actually come back after a first term in office. It's not unprecedented.
Was that Spanner? Was that the book? That wasn't that one.
No.
But as Jackie said, I mean, £1 million at some point, it just sat... That's a huge amount of money in a single donation from one person, that it feels like, what was the motive for that? Because Boris Johnson at the moment
is
just a sitting MP.
There is such a thing, Ben, as philanthropy. And in America, everything is done through
Are we too
philanthropy.
cynical over here, then?
I think we are too cynical. Not everyone has a bad motive for donating money either to a political party or to an individual politician. If you look at the shadow cabinet before you start, Jackie...
No, I'm not criticising the donation.
will be raised... I mean, Wes Streeting has raised a hell of a lot of money to fund his office.
Yep.
It's not all come from the taxpayer,
some people
and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but what some people are accusing some people in the shadow cabinet of doing is preparing leadership bids. And our point is, surely that's not... Obviously not. What the argument here is, isn't this a sign that Boris is not going to go quietly off into the sunset, even to earn considerable amounts...
Why should he go off quietly into the sunset? He's an ex-Prime Minister. He is a significant figure in British politics. I mean, what do you expect him to do? Go and just lie on a sun lounge in the Bahamas or something?
Is this only about his post-Prime Ministerial time? Or, as you've admitted, does he really still harbour the idea that he's going to come back? In which case, I think he's a bit deluded, isn't he?
You could argue that.
Do you know what? Ian has gone quiet, and he's also accused Ben of being cynical. And when Ian accuses Ben of being cynical, more cynical than him, we know we're in trouble. Shall we talk Brits?